What up, family? This is Nakata, the author of Heart on Break, and your go-to metaphysical life coach. Help you get in tune with yourself. I made a post recently on Instagram, and I just wanted to shoot a video just to back it up a little bit and provide a little bit more reference on the context that there's a conversation that needs to be had about the certain amount of men who perhaps didn't go through like a long laundry list of trauma and had perhaps a very naive perspective on life and women in particular, to the point where that they didn't understand the effects of a woman's trauma on them. And I think whether your trauma level is high or low, as men, we're influenced to want to absorb and resolve problems for the women in our lives. It's a natural masculine attribute to actually really want to resolve the problems if you can. But the truth is, when we're dealing with trauma, as is evidenced for the last 40, 50 years of relationships, the more trauma that a person comes with due to their upbringing and their social conditioning, trauma happens during one's upbringing in most cases, and trauma also happens in your adult life. The idea that all of us are fucked up beyond repair, though, is not true. There are men and women, of course, but there are men who, didn't get molested, you know what I'm saying, who didn't get beat to a pulp, or if they did get whippings, were able to recover from that, because that is traumatizing. There are some men out here whose biggest trauma was probably, whether or not they did their chores correctly, you know what I'm saying, and whether or not they get the certain rewards that come along with being good, or things of that nature. Everybody's trauma is not, the reason why they are not successful in relationships, and everybody's trauma is not the reason why they deserve to be treated bad. So in cases where you're dealing with men who have low trauma or a low trauma count, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, somebody's gonna say to him, okay, well, you still had something wrong with him too. But yeah, whatever the fuck was wrong with me wasn't why the relationship didn't work out. You know what I'm saying? The relationship didn't work out because of whatever the fuck was wrong with her that I didn't realize was something that I wouldn't be able to deal with, because I never been through that shit. Because I didn't have this example. My life didn't turn out this way. This is not my second, third, or 15th girl who's been through this situation. I didn't exactly know how to deal with that. And that's what happens with low trauma men, because there's this level of naivety that you may have because you didn't experience as rough of an upbringing or as traumatizing as of a life experience as she did, or even others. You know what I'm saying? Your friends, like you're gonna know if you got 4 dudes that's in your crew, whether it's high school or grown, like everybody's got some level of trauma, and you get to look and be like, okay, he been through this. I didn't have it as bad, or I had it worse, or we look at each other, we can tell, and the truth is everybody ain't been through hell and high water in their lives. And when those guys naively approach relationships, which they tend to do from the savior perspective, or even just the do right by her perspective. That was the nature of my post. You know what I'm saying? You low trauma, good dude, you trying to live up to this female validation standard, which is a problem, which is really why low trauma men get played so much by medium to high trauma women, is because the female validation system is already a hold of him. You get what I'm saying? So he's trying to please somebody, not because of her merits or her quality or her caliber of being or how well she compliments him, but more so he's just trying to do that because that's what men are supposed to do to impress women. Never mind the fact that she may not even be worth impressing. You know what I'm saying? And that may have to do with her trauma, but as long as women look good and as long as men have been socialized to, to give and to seek, validation from women in the matter of which we do, we're going to automatically have that, whether we high trauma or low trauma. So with that being said, a lot of low trauma men are still trying to please women, and that woman pleasing aspect that you've been taught, by your mother, especially if you come from a single parent home. And if you come from a single parent home, I consider it to be along the scale of low trauma. Not all men and women who come from single parent household have high, medium to high trauma. Let's just be real. There's some single parent mothers and fathers who held it down and did a good enough job to keep their children from being over traumatized by the world. So if you came from a single parent home and let's say you got exposed to some porn or some sexual nature that but not sexual abuse, that could be it for some of you. It could be, bad relationships with family members. I call that low trauma because we all have to learn how to deal with and or accept, where we come from. If it can't be changed, it can't be changed. But if something didn't specifically happen to you, trauma is real for sure, but it's relative. Everybody doesn't experience certain things. And some people who have experienced what you would call moderate to high trauma experiences in their life, move on from those at better rates than others, which, in some ways bring their trauma levels down, even if it spiked with one particular horrific experience. Everybody responds differently. But the point is, when you have low trauma, and you're not used to going through certain things, and you do not understand the shock, the pain, the emotional state that somebody may still be in after having something happen to them in their teenage years or, however long ago it happened. Low trauma people do not really understand that unless they have high exposure to people who have experienced those traumatizing experiences, so then they can understand it, but they'll never really understand it as in being able to walk a mile in that person's shoe, or to be able to be like, that happened to me too, that happened to somebody I knew, and so I understand, but it's very hard when for the first time you're responding to somebody's trauma that you've never seen or had personal experience with. When low trauma men go through these experiences, it could take them from low trauma to medium trauma to even high trauma, with most of that trauma happening in their adult life from experiencing this level of dysfunctionality within a relationship with somebody else. I know plenty of men who, for the most part are cool or what have you, been through this, been through that, but the trauma wasn't debilitating. You know what I'm saying? Well, everybody needs therapy, but how by how a person behaves in certain ways, especially when tough times come, that how impactful their trauma is on them. So, I've seen people who are okay on that level, low to medium, but start dealing with women who have high trauma, and let's say their high trauma, it may not be sexual abuse, rape, or any of those, extreme things. Maybe something dealing with the family relationships, arguments, not getting along with the mother and or father or lack thereof, but it turned into a high trauma situation due to the amount of stress and confrontation that went into those traumatizing moments. You get what I'm saying? Sometimes it'll be people arguing with their parents over some insignificant things, but cursing and doing certain things and doing it in such a way that, it becomes highly traumatizing. So when you get exposed to somebody who has those experiences, who has that kind of shook up nervous system that's always on edge, and you don't know what it's like to experience that. You know what I'm saying? You don't know what you let's say in your mind, you think that we're going to talk it out and we're going to work it out, and that's not what she's used to. When low trauma men and low trauma people get in relationships in their adult lives, this can be the onset of some adult age trauma that really does impact you in the same way that the trauma that she had or they had in their early life is impacting them now. Now you're getting impacted from the trauma that you're experiencing with this person at an adult age, and you don't really know how to respond to it. Everybody's like, oh, this is pretty normal. This is pretty normal. They laugh. Oh, that happened to me. But it ain't never happened to you. And it probably never happened close enough to you for you to even understand. And it's traumatizing. And it changes the nature of your ability to successfully move on. And listen, I'm talking about men. Like, listen, women got everything that they need to talk about every problem that they have. You know what I'm saying? And as a coach, I work with lots of men, and I understand that a lot of men, good men, you know what I'm saying? Because good men cheat, good men lie, good men work jobs, good men lose jobs too, good men don't work as well too. You get what I'm saying? A lot of good men are traumatized from having high trauma experiences with women that they never experienced in their lives, that they thought that they'd be okay with. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, a lot of that is rooted in the Captain Save 'em culture that all men have been given. That's why you have to work hard on your game and your mindset to avoid the pitfalls of saving damsels in distress, or, you know, engaging in situations based on sexual urges alone, because those are the sure shot ways to get caught up, even though your intentions are so-called good. And then when you get trapped into those levels of traumas, you know, everybody's nervous system ain't so good to deal with everything. You know, when I first got exposed to certain things in traumatic relationships, I used to try to ignore it because I'm like, yo, this is crazy. Like, are you serious? And then you can't ignore it forever if it's something that kind of traumatizes you. You get what I'm saying? So when low trauma men get involved in medium to high trauma situations with women and there's no healing that comes from it, you know, like, this is really fucking up your ability to move forward. And this is why so many low trauma men end up in these compromising relationships with women over and over and over, because you're used to high trauma women, highly stressed women with a lot of cortisol impacting the way they feel. You know what I'm saying? Women who didn't necessarily grow up so well. And it's a contrast because, of course, it makes sense. She perhaps come from somewhere where the trauma was high. And listen, like I said, high trauma doesn't necessarily mean that it's always sexual molestation or sexual abuse involved in the situation. It doesn't necessarily mean that, but we know when it's high, and in many cases a lot of women know how to disguise it, especially in their femininity and their sexuality. And that's what for a lot of good men that attracted you to her in the first place. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's like, low trauma men, you really have to understand your value, because what is happening here is that due to your low trauma, in many cases, it doesn't mean that you don't have your quirks. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that you're perfect, but in many cases, you're not. Your behaviors, the way that you conduct yourself is not negatively impacting your partner, and you fucking know that shit. You know what I'm saying? Sure, she may have to adjust to my ways. You know, she's gonna be in a relationship with me or whatever, because I like my shit this way. That's not traumatizing. That's discipline. That's orderly. That's orderliness. You know what I'm saying? That's me knowing myself. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, you know, when you get upset and you punch a hole in the wall, that's affecting her. So if she's not used to that and she spazzes out or runs away from you, you know what I'm saying, she may be low trauma too, not used to dealing with this type of stuff. Or she may be trying to save you like you, the low trauma man, is trying to save the high trauma woman. It works both ways for those who are going to come and comment and say it works both ways. I don't give a fuck if it works both ways. I'm talking about men for the most part. You get what I'm saying? But it does work both ways. And the point is, for us, we're the ones that get stuck trying to save somebody, because it's not in the nature of woman to save man. You get what I'm saying? A woman is behaving in a masculine manner when she's trying to save a man, and it doesn't always last forever because she always gets played. Whereas there are enough examples of men saving women, no matter how, you know, much people want to say don't save her, she don't want to be saved, it's within the attributes of man to somewhat save a woman. You get what I'm saying? It's just that you have to be exemplary in many cases to even have what it takes to save the person. Because, like, you know, you can't be jumping off into the ocean to save somebody from drowning when you can't swim. And that's what a lot of good dudes with low trauma attempt to do. They attempt to be lifeguards and they can't swim. You get what I'm saying? And this is how you end up drowning. And drowning in this case means that now you are exposed to some high trauma behavior that has shook you up, and now is going to, in many cases, change the way you relate to women, because so many women that you meet are very similar in recovering from high trauma situations and haven't fully healed. And now you're going to need healing, which is why, my book was always about taking a break from these situations to do your own healing. And healing for me, when I talk to men, really revolves around getting in alignment with your life's purpose by any means necessary, and sacrificing as much attachments as you possibly can to the outer feminine, which is other women, and focus more on connecting with your inner feminine. So when you detach from those situations, that could be your mother, that could be all women that you talk to, that could be a variety of different outside feminine entities. But sometimes it's okay, especially when you're going through these situations, to detach, because you'll always reconnect. But it's better to reconnect with your purpose in hand, being committed to something, so that way they can learn to respect this new individual that's emerging. So low trauma, I know that there's this genuine soul connection, soul thing where you really want to do right and have a family and all of this shit. We've all been there. You get what I'm saying? You want something normal, but there ain't no fucking normal anymore. You get what I'm saying? Not when you were dealing with most people with medium to high trauma. The whole system has been designed essentially to create these effects. And the few low trauma people who are left here, you can either get desensitized to all the high trauma people and continue trying to work it out with them, or you can learn that, okay, I need to, if everybody's got some trauma, right, and I'm low trauma, then I need to deal with a medium trauma woman then, because I need to, then I'm not going to deal with anybody with this kind of trauma that I really can't deal with, that I really can't relate to, that I really can't predict and how it makes her behave. But I can deal with this, because everybody's got a little bit of this. You got to know, you can't go to the high. You might need to stick to the medium, or you need to stick to somebody low, which will make it harder to find that mate. But if it's worth it for you, you'll do it. You get what I'm saying? But you got to know what you're able to tolerate, because like I said in the post, like, all trauma ain't relative. And low trauma men, we end up stuck in these relationships due to obligations that come from children. You end up tied to somebody who's high trauma, high stress, not healing, continuously going through traumatic cycles in their lives, and literally trying to throw you in for the loop for you to take a ride on their trauma mobile whenever they feel like it, just because you're tolerant of her, or that's because you won't slap the shit out of her. You're a good dude. You trying to do what's best for everybody, but she's not. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, I know that this works both ways, because we know a lot of high trauma men who have done similar things. But for the low trauma men who haven't been through that much, and some of you guys out there harping on your trauma too hard, you know what I'm saying? It ain't as bad as it is, and maybe you've made peace with it, and that makes you feel like, your little medium trauma or even high trauma just make you feel like you're supposed to go out there and deal with somebody who's been through more trauma, and it's relative, but you still can't deal with theirs. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not worth it. If you're low trauma, you got to be more careful. You got to be more mindful. You got to be more skilled at courting, because when you're low trauma and you work on yourself to increase your value, to know your purpose and various other things, you're not just going to attract the cream of the crop women. You're still going to attract everybody. You're still going to attract high trauma, medium trauma, low trauma. The skill then is learning how to sift through them to select the one that suits your evolutionary process. And you got to understand that you being further along in your evolutionary process is attributed to the fact that you had low trauma, and low trauma meant that you got more time to focus on this and got more time to focus on that, because you had to do less recovery, you had to do less drugs, you had to do less drinking, you had to do less sexual validation because you were onto something. Those men do exist. You get what I'm saying? They do. And the women want them, but the women also don't want to acknowledge that, damn, this is the cream of the fucking crop. You know what I'm saying? When you get access to the cream of the crop, you're supposed to act like it. And that's the thing. Because these men have been played and been through these trauma, adult life trauma situations, they still not high trauma people. You get what I'm saying? These individuals are still not necessarily high trauma people. You can heal better, especially when you don't have a laundry list of trauma that you've gone through. So a lot of guys who had low trauma and you had some high trauma experiences in your adult life, gather yourself. Don't forget who you are. I remember one time I was going through it, and my father, he was said to me, he was like, at the end of the day, man, you don't sound like my son anymore. You don't sound like the person that I raised. You're allowing these things to make you into somebody you're not. And I thought about it, and he was right, because I couldn't be the same no more after going through these things that I was experiencing for at that time. I was experiencing them very harshly, as a 29, 30-year-old person, because I had never been through them, and I never fathomed that any of these type of things could even happen to me. And of course it was changing who I was. And I'm glad he said it to me and for me to actually, go and think about it later on, and how I could have really sunk into a hole. And then at the end of the day, when you have trauma bonds and soul ties to people instead of actual loving relationships, you really do have to go with your mighty sword and cut it off, because it ain't love. You understand what I'm saying? And then the trauma bonds, it's like they bond to you, and now you're in a downward spiral because of the bond. And if you do not separate yourself from the bond, it doesn't matter if children are involved. You have to be able to save yourself in order to save anyone else. And low trauma men, like I said in the post, just a little bit more naive, just a little bit more inclined to save, just a little bit more inclined to not understand that, yeah, she been through all this shit, she fucked up, man. Like, you need to leave her alone. She need therapy first. Like, you need like a year of therapy before you can even have sex with her. You get what I'm saying? Like, we're not even taught these things. You get what I'm saying? And it's for our own detriment. But on the other hand, women understand when you're just here for sex. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, man, low trauma men are different. You have to treat yourself different. You got to be kind to yourself, and then you got to also work on hooking yourself from the female validation train. Be yourself first, and then you can accommodate others from your space, but not accommodate others at the expense of being who you truly are, or even accumulating more trauma, unnecessarily trauma, because of somebody else. You got to be able to protect yourself and protect your lineage. That's it. Let me know what y'all think. I know, let me know what y'all think. Be sure to share this. Every man out here is not fucked up beyond repair. A lot of low trauma men still have to deal with high trauma women, and it's also a very traumatizing experience for them. Hit me up, hardonbreak.com for coaching. Peace.